Well, that was the week that was. Can you imagine in 20 years' time, 25 years' time, people looking back at this week and the last few weeks? It will be truly extraordinary. But in this week in history, here's what happened. On this very day, March 29, in 1971, U.S. Lieutenant William Calley was found guilty of murder at a court-martial for his part in the My Lai massacre, where troops under his command wiped out in cold blood, in mass murder, 500 South Vietnamese civilians. Calley was in charge of Charlie Company, a unit of the 11th Infantry Brigade, who were on a mission to root out Viet Cong soldiers, of whom there were none in the razed village. The massacre came to light a year after it happened, after investigative media reports. In 1969, journalist Seymour Hersh, with whom I'm proud to have worked, won the Pulitzer Prize for his expose of it. The My Lai crimes included mass murder, rape, sodomy, maiming, and assault of civilians. William Calley was sentenced to life with hard labour, but within 3 days he was out of prison pending appeal on the personal instructions of then-President Richard Nixon. He spent the next 3 years under house arrest at Fort Benning in Georgia. Freed on bail in 1974, his sentence was then cut to 10 years for 500 murders, but he was paroled later that year after completing just 1/3 of that sentence. Calley remains alive. The 500 innocents remain dead. Also on this day in 1971, Charles Manson and 3 members of his hippie cult were sentenced to death in Los Angeles. They were found guilty of the August 1969 murders of 7 people and 1 unborn child. Their victims included 8 months pregnant actress Sharon Tate, the wife of the film director Roman Polanski. It had been one of the longest-running murder trials in U.S. history, with a jury sequestered for longer than ever before, 225 days. The California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty in 1972, and the 4 were given life sentences. In April 2002, Manson was refused parole for the 10th time, and the 3 other conspirators have also had numerous parole applications refused. Jumping forward a couple of days, it was on March the 31st, 1966, that Harold Wilson's Labour Party won a sweeping 96-seat majority in the UK general election. I worked very hard for that. Prime Minister Wilson hailed the result as a great victory. It was only the 2nd time that a Labour government had been voted back into power. However, Labour lost popularity when it devalued the pound in November 1967. Plans for trade union reforms had to be shelved, and France vetoed Britain's 2nd application for membership of the then European Economic Community. Although Labour enjoyed something of a revival in 1969, Mr. Wilson went on to lose the 1970 election to Edward Heath's Conservatives. He was elected, though, Mr. Wilson, for a 3rd term in government in March, so that should be February actually, of 1974, when the party scraped a working majority. But in March 1976, he surprised everyone by announcing he was resigning and making way for an older man after just turning 60. I got to know Harold Wilson very well after his resignation. I spent a lot of time with him in his gloomy flat behind Westminster Cathedral. He told me a lot of things which I'm not yet in a position to divulge. Earlier in this week, on March 28, 1979, a nuclear leak at the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania caused panic in America. Radioactive steam leaked into the atmosphere. The accident happened as a result of human error and equipment failure when a water pump broke down and the plant was partially shut down. 3 Mile Island remains the largest nuclear accident in US history. It's apart from the bombs they dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It attracted enormous public attention, although nobody died as a direct result of the accident and the subsequent radioactive fallout. On March the 30th, 1981, I remember this well actually, as if it was yesterday, US President Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded by a lone gunman who opened fire in Washington. 5 to 6 shots were fired as he left the Washington Hilton Hotel, where he'd been addressing a union convention about 1 mile from the White House. He underwent emergency surgery at George Washington University Hospital and made a fast recovery. John Hinckley, 25, the son of an affluent oil industry executive, was charged with trying to assassinate the president, fueled by an obsession with actress Jodie Foster and a desire to impress her. The following June, Hinckley was found not guilty by reasons of insanity and was committed to hospital. Again on March 30th this time, in 1951, an American electrical engineer and his wife were found guilty by New York's federal court of passing atomic secrets to the Russians. Julius Rosenberg, 33, and his 35-year-old wife, Ethel, were accused of stealing technical information from the Atomic Research Center in Los Alamos and turning it over to the KGB. The Rosenbergs were sentenced to death on the 5th of April, 1951, and despite numerous appeals for clemency, were executed by the electric chair at Sing Sing prison on the 19th of June, 1953. They were the only people in the United States ever executed for Cold War espionage, and their conviction fueled US Senator Joseph McCarthy's anti-communist crusade against un-American activities by US citizens. However, records and later testimony from intelligence sources in the US and Russia suggest the Rosenbergs had only been involved in giving information to Soviet contacts in support of the war effort against Hitler. Skipping quickly over April Fool's Day, although it was on this day in 2017 that Bob Dylan received his Nobel Prize for Literature. Who writes this stuff? It was on April the 2nd, 1982, that Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, provoking a war with Britain. The islands off the coast of Argentina had been a cause of friction between the two countries ever since Britain seized them in 1833, emphasis on the word seized. The war cost the lives of 655 Argentine and 255 British servicemen, many of them sailors, who died during attacks on warships. The Falklands War ended on the 14th of June, when the commander of the Argentine garrison at Port Stanley surrendered to British troops. The victory greatly boosted the popularity of Margaret Thatcher's government, which went on to win the next election. Famous birthdays this week include John Major, that's a famous birthday, the former British Prime Minister, who is 77 today. Tomorrow is the birthday of rock guitarist Eric Clapton, who will be 75, who'd have thunk it, and also the actor Robbie Coltrane, who will be celebrating his 70th. And here's an odd, if seminal, celebration. March 31st in 1967 was the first time that Jimi Hendrix burned his guitar on stage in London. It brought the house down. Well, almost. April 2nd in 1939 was the day the late and great soul singer Marvin Gaye was born. I was just thinking about that. On the same day, but in 1977, Fleetwood Mac's Rumours album went to #1 and stayed there for 31 weeks. Wow.